The first rule aboard the Ketheri Deep Survey vessel was simple. Ration everything.
Food,
Water, oxygen, energy,
hope.
Commander Threx had repeated it so often that even the youngest cadets whispered it in their sleep. Ration the food, he hissed now, his mandibles clicking with agitation as he glared across the dim command deck. We have calculated supplies for 72 cycles. No more. The ship groaned around them, metal plates expanding under the strain of their long drift through the void. Outside, the stars were cold, distant pinpricks, silent witnesses to a crew slowly starving. And in the center of it all sat the anomaly, the human. When they first found him, he had been floating in a fractured escape pod, unconscious but alive. That alone had unsettled the crew. The pod was ancient, its markings unrecognizable. Its systems were barely functioning, yet it had preserved him, somehow, through a region of space that stripped shields and devoured ships. They had brought him aboard cautiously, curiously, regretfully, because now, 3 cycles later, their carefully calculated rations were failing. "Commander," said Science Officer Viral, her voice thin with concern, "the human consumes 3 times the caloric intake of a Ketheri adult." "Incorrect," corrected Medical Officer San. "4 times." A low murmur spread through the crew. Threx's compound eyes narrowed. "And yet," he said slowly, "he does not appear weakened."
No.
The human, Elias Ward, according to the translation implant, looked stronger each day. He sat now at the far end of the chamber, legs crossed, calmly polishing a small metal tool. His expression was relaxed, almost amused, as if starvation were a minor inconvenience, as if the void itself were something he had already survived. "Human," Threx called. Elias looked up, offering a small nod. "Yeah." Threx resisted the instinctive urge to recoil at the casual tone. "You have been informed of our rationing protocol."
Yep.
"And yet you requested additional food." Elias leaned back slightly. "I didn't request it. I asked if you wanted help." A ripple of confusion passed through the crew. "Helped consuming more?" San asked incredulously. Elias chuckled softly.
No.
"Help making more." Silence. "Then, that is not possible," Viral said flatly. "Matter conversion at that scale exceeds our capabilities." "I didn't say anything about converting matter," Elias replied. "I said making food." Threx's patience snapped. "Food cannot be created from nothing." Elias shrugged. "Good thing we're not starting from nothing." The tension on the bridge thickened. Threx stepped closer, towering over the seated human. "Explain." Elias glanced around at the crew, then gestured vaguely toward the ship. "You've got organic waste processors, right?" "Of course." "Water reclamation systems?" "Yes." "Heat exchangers, atmospheric regulators, microbial filters?" "Yes." Elias grinned. "Congratulations. You're already halfway to a kitchen." The crew erupted into overlapping chatter. "This is absurd. He suggests we consume waste. Primitive species." Threx raised a clawed limb, silencing them instantly. "You propose," he said carefully, "that we transform refuse into sustenance." Elias tilted his head. "That's literally what eating is." 3 cycles later, against every instinct and regulation, they gave him access to a section of the ship. A sealed, unused maintenance bay. Threx had assigned guards. And a failsafe. If the human attempted sabotage, the entire section would be vented into space. The first thing Elias did was ask for dirt. That had nearly ended the experiment. "We do not carry dirt," Viral snapped. "Then we're going to make some," Elias replied calmly. The process was disturbing. Organic waste, microbial cultures, shredded plant fibers from their emergency reserves. Everything was layered, heated, aerated. It smelled terrible. Several crew members refused to enter the bay. Others watched with horrified fascination as the human worked tirelessly, adjusting temperatures, muttering calculations, occasionally smiling to himself. Decomposition, Son whispered one cycle, observing through the glass. He is accelerating decay. Incorrect, Elias called without looking up. I'm accelerating life. Days passed. Then something changed. The smell shifted. Less rot. More earth.
Rich. Alive.
Impossible, Viral breathed as she scanned the material. Microbial density is stabilizing. Nutrient profiles are increasing. Elias wiped his hands on a cloth. Told you. But this is only substrate, she insisted. Not food. Patience, Elias said. We're just getting started. Next came the seeds. Tiny, insignificant, precious. They had been stored in a forgotten archive, botanical samples from dozens of worlds. None had ever been used. Until now. Plants require light, Threx pointed out. Elias gestured upward. We've got lights. Artificial light is insufficient for. Elias flipped a switch. The bay flooded with a carefully calibrated spectrum.
Warm. Bright. Alive.
The first sprout appeared 6 cycles later. A single green shoot pushing through the dark soil. The crew gathered in silence, staring as if witnessing a miracle. Life, whispered one cadet. No, Elias corrected softly. Food. From that moment, everything changed. The bay became a garden. Rows of plants stretched under artificial suns. Leafy greens. Root vegetables. Strange hybrid crops Elias engineered by cross-referencing their database. He worked constantly, adjusting nutrients, optimizing growth cycles, teaching the crew. Reluctantly at first, then eagerly. Why? Threx demanded one cycle, watching as Elias carefully harvested a cluster of bright red fruits. You are expending enormous effort for us. Elias paused, then shrugged. Because you're hungry. That is not sufficient reason. Elias met his gaze. It is where I come from. The first meal was simple. Cooked greens. Roasted roots. A thick, steaming broth. The crew gathered hesitantly, staring at the unfamiliar dishes. It is safe?
Son asked.
Elias took a bite, chewed, swallowed.
Yeah.
It's good. One by one, they tasted it. And everything changed. Flavor. Real flavor. Not processed nutrient paste. Not sterile ration blocks. This was alive. Complex.
Warm.
This, Viral whispered, eyes wide. This is extraordinary. Elias grinned. Dinner's ready. But it didn't stop there. He improved it. Spices from archived samples. Fermentation processes. Simple cooking techniques that transformed basic ingredients into something more. Something joyful. Morale surged. Energy returned. The crew worked harder. Laughed more. For the first time since their mission began, the ship felt alive. But not everyone was pleased. Commander, Son said quietly one cycle, we are becoming dependent. Threx's mandibles twitched. On food. On the human. That cycle. Threx entered the garden alone. Elias was kneeling among the plants, carefully tending to a delicate vine. You have altered this vessel, Threx said. Elias didn't look up. Seems like it needed it. You have altered my crew. Yeah. That was not your place. Elias finally met his gaze. Neither was starving. Silence stretched between them. Then Threx spoke again. What do you want in return? Elias blinked. Return? No being gives without expectation. Elias leaned back, considering. Then he smiled. Actually, there is one thing. The next cycle, the entire crew gathered. Tables had been arranged. Dishes laid out. Steam rising in fragrant waves. What is this? Viral asked. Elias spread his arms. Dessert. Confusion.
Curiosity.
Suspicion. He handed out small portions.
Golden.
Sweet-smelling.
Soft.
Threx hesitated, then took a bite. Everything stopped. The sweetness. The richness. The warmth that spread through his entire body. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. This, he whispered, voice trembling. This is beyond sustenance. Elias nodded. Yeah, that's the point. The crew erupted into astonished murmurs. Some laughed. Some stared in disbelief. Some simply closed their eyes, savoring the moment. Threx looked at the human. For this, he said slowly, you transformed waste into life, starvation into abundance. Elias shrugged. I made dinner. No, Threx said. You did more. Weeks later, the Ketheri deep survey vessel changed course. Not out of desperation, but purpose. They began cataloging habitable worlds differently, not just for resources, but for growth, for life, for possibility. And at the center of it all, the human stood in the garden teaching a group of cadets how to plant seeds. Remember, Elias said, pressing soil gently around a sprout, you don't just grow food. He looked up, smiling. You grow hope. Ending years later, long after the mission had ended and the Ketheri returned home, the story spread across their entire civilization, of the time they were starving in the void, of the rigid commander who believed survival meant rationing, of the crew who had forgotten what it meant to live, and of the human who looked at a dying ship and said, dinner's ready with dessert. The Ketheri would go on to build vast biodomes, living ships, and self-sustaining colonies. They would become known not as survivors, but as growers of worlds. And in every one of those worlds, in the richest soil and the smallest gardens, there was always a quiet tradition. Before the first harvest, before the first meal, someone would smile and say,